The Indian subcontinent, circa 325 BC. Dozens of small kingdoms and republics are highlighted, their borders flickering like unstable flames. The powerful kingdom of Magadha. We see opulent but decadent scenes from the court of the Nanda dynasty, piles of gold, arrogant nobles, and a populace simmering with resentment. In the east, the Nanda Empire was wealthy and powerful, yet its rule was defined by greed and arrogance, alienating its people. It was a giant with feet of clay, ripe for collapse. This was the stage, set for two of the most formidable figures in Indian history to make their entrance. A young, athletic Chandragupta Maurya, his eyes burning with intensity, practices swordsmanship. On the other, the shrewd, calculating face of the Brahmin scholar Chanakya, poring over ancient texts by candlelight. Meet the arm and the mind of the revolution. Chandragupta Maurya, a young man with a disputed lineage, but an undisputed claim to greatness, and his mentor, Chanakya, a master of statecraft whose brilliant, ruthless intellect was captured in his legendary treatise, the Arthashastra. Together, they were a force of nature, poised to topple dynasties and build an empire from the ashes. The weathered pages of the Arthashastra. The page, illustrating concepts of espionage, economic policy, and military strategy. Chanakya's philosophy was brutally pragmatic. The welfare of the state is the highest law, and a king must use any means necessary to protect and expand it. His Arthashastra was not a book of ideals, but a manual for power, a guide to navigating the treacherous currents of politics. It was the blueprint for everything that was to come. Chandragupta rallying disparate soldiers, forging alliances with regional chieftains, and training a new, disciplined army. The glint of newly forged steel, and the raising of a new banner. With Chanakya's strategy and Chandragupta's charisma, a formidable army was born. It was a coalition of the disenfranchised, united by a singular, audacious goal, the capture of the Nanda throne at Pataliputra. Their march was not just a military campaign, it was the start of India's unification. The Siege of Pataliputra. We see Chanakya's strategies in action, spies opening gates from within, supply lines being cut, and Chandragupta leading a decisive charge through a city thrown into chaos. The Nanda Empire, for all its wealth, fell swiftly. Chanakya's intricate web of espionage and psychological warfare crippled them from the inside before the first major battle was won. In 322 BC, Chandragupta Maurya stormed the capital, not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator in the eyes of many. Chandragupta, now robed in imperial splendor, sits on the throne of Magadha. Chanakya stands beside him in the shadows, a quiet but powerful presence. The boy from nowhere was now an emperor, a samrat. The Mauryan dynasty had begun. But conquering a kingdom is one thing. Building a lasting empire that stretches from sea to sea is another challenge entirely. Map shows the Mauryan territories rapidly expanding westward and southward. Rivers, mountains, and forests are all consumed by the growing Mauryan color. For years, Chandragupta's armies marched, consolidating power and absorbing smaller kingdoms into their fold. The Mauryan state was a marvel of organization, with a centralized administration, a vast network of spies, and a standing army that was the envy of the world. But their greatest test would come not from within India, but from the west. To the dusty plains of the northwest. A massive army, disciplined and organized in the Greek phalanx formation, marches under the banner of Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander the Great's successors. The Greeks had returned. Seleucus Nicator, ruler of the sprawling Seleucid Empire, sought to reclaim Alexander's Indian territories. Two of the ancient world's most powerful military forces were on a collision course. The two armies facing each other across a riverbank. On one side, the Greek phalanxes with their long spears. On the other, the Mauryan army with its terrifying war elephants, appearing like living mountains. The air is thick with tension. Imagine the standoff, two worlds colliding on the banks of the Indus. The strategic might of the West against the staggering power of the East. A war between them would have reshaped history, but what happened next was far more unexpected. Instead of battle, a diplomatic exchange. Chandragupta and Seleucus meet under a canopy. A treaty is signed. The scene dissolves to show 500 Mauryan war elephants being gifted to Seleucus's army. Recognizing the futility of a bloody war, the two rulers chose diplomacy over conflict. Chandragupta secured his northwestern frontier, and in a stunning geopolitical exchange, he traded 500 war elephants for vast territories and a marital alliance. The Maurya Empire was now not just a military power, but a diplomatic one. The Greek ambassador, Megasthenes, walking through the bustling, magnificent city of Pataliputra. He jots down notes, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief at the scale of the wooden palaces, the efficiency of the government, and the complexity of the society. This treaty opened a channel between cultures. Megasthenes' detailed accounts in his book Indica would give the Western world its first real glimpse into the sophisticated civilization of Mauryan India. The empire was no longer an enigma, but a recognized superpower on the global stage. Time passes. We see an older Chandragupta who, according to Jain tradition, renounces his throne for a life of asceticism. His son, Bindusara, rules, and we get our first glimpse of Bindusara's son, Ashoka, as a young, ruthless governor, brutally crushing a rebellion. The empire passed from Chandragupta to his son Bindusara, who maintained its strength. But it was his grandson, Ashoka, who was destined to etch the Mauryan name into eternity. Initially, his path was paved not with peace, but with blood and ambition. Ashoka's coronation. The ceremony is grand and imposing, but his expression is severe and unyielding. He is known as Chandashoka, Ashoka the Fierce. After a brutal succession struggle, Ashoka ascended the throne around 268 BC. His ambition was singular and absolute, to complete the work of his grandfather and bring the entire subcontinent, every last piece of the mosaic, under his control. Only one major kingdom stood in his way, Kalinga. A massive Mauryan army, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, and elephants, marches towards Kalinga on the east coast. The shots are intimidating, focusing on the sheer, overwhelming scale of the military machine. The invasion of Kalinga was the high-water mark of Mauryan military might. Ashoka unleashed the full force of his empire upon the independent kingdom, expecting a swift and glorious victory. But the victory he achieved would come at a cost that would haunt him forever. The aftermath of the Kalinga War. Battlefield littered with over 100,000 dead. The river Daya runs red with blood. We see the faces of suffering civilians, weeping widows, and orphaned children. The conquest was total, but the victory was hollow. The sheer scale of the slaughter, the devastation wrought upon the people of Kalinga, shattered something within the fierce emperor. The conqueror stood victorious on a field of death, and for the first time, he felt not pride, but profound, soul-crushing remorse. Ashoka's face, his eyes, once filled with fierce ambition, are now wide with horror and regret as he surveys the carnage he has caused. A single tear traces a path through the dust on his cheek. What does it take to change the heart of a conqueror? For Ashoka, it was this moment of horrific clarity. The victor of the war had become its greatest casualty, his spirit broken by the weight of his own actions. Ashoka stands before a Buddhist monk. He lays his sword at the monk's feet, tilts up to the sky, where the clouds seem to part, letting a ray of sunlight illuminate him. In that moment, Chandashoka died, and Dhammashoka, Ashoka the Righteous, was born. He renounced violent conquest, embraced the teachings of Buddhism, and vowed to replace the law of the sword with the law of piety, or Dhamma. This was the empire's most profound and interesting twist. Stonemasons across the vast empire carving Ashoka's edicts into magnificent stone pillars and rock faces. The Brahmi script being chiseled into the rock. Ashoka's new conquest was one of hearts and minds. He inscribed his policies of Dhamma, of compassion, tolerance, and nonviolence, on stone pillars for all to see. These were not just royal decrees. They were a public confession, a moral guide, and a promise to his people. Visualizations of Dhamma in action. State-funded hospitals for people and animals being built, shady banyan trees and wells being established along trade routes, and judicial officers instructed to be impartial and merciful. The empire transformed. Its immense resources were now directed towards public welfare. Ashoka sought to build a true welfare state, ensuring the security and well-being of all his subjects, regardless of their religion or social standing. A majestic, slow-circling shot of the magnificent lion capital of Ashoka at Sarnath. The 4 lions face the cardinal directions, symbolizing the spread of Dhamma across the land. This iconic sculpture, the lion capital, became the symbol of his new reign. It represented not the roar of a military conqueror, but the peaceful proclamation of a universal, moral law. It was a powerful statement of a new kind of empire. Lines trace paths from India to Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and the Hellenistic kingdoms. Buddhist missionaries, including Ashoka's own children Mahinda and Sanghamitra, traveling these routes. Ashoka's vision was not limited to his borders. He sponsored Buddhist missions that carried the message of peace far and wide, transforming Buddhism from a local Indian sect into a world religion. His influence reshaped the spiritual landscape of Asia forever. A grand hall in Pataliputra, filled with thousands of Buddhist monks for the Third Buddhist Council. The atmosphere is one of intense debate, scholarship, and spiritual unity, all under Ashoka's patronage. He convened the Great Third Buddhist Council to codify the scriptures and purify the faith. Pataliputra, once the heart of a military machine, was now the global center of spiritual philosophy. This was the true climax of the Maurya Empire. The Maurya Empire at its peak. It is peaceful and prosperous, connected by roads, united by a common ideal, and glowing with cultural and spiritual light. Under Ashoka, the Maurya Empire reached its zenith, controlling nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. It was an empire held together not just by force, but by a shared moral purpose. It was, for a brief, shining moment in history, an empire of peace. The Ashokan pillars beginning to age. The map of the empire begins to flicker again, with territories in the south and northwest starting to break away. A succession of weaker, anonymous rulers on the throne. But no golden age lasts forever. After Ashoka's death in 232 BCE, his successors lacked his vision and authority. The immense cost of a standing army and a vast administration, combined with a policy of nonviolence, may have weakened the empire's military resolve, and it began to fracture. The last Mauryan emperor, Brihadratha, is reviewing his troops. His own general, Pushyamitra Shunga, steps forward, draws a hidden sword, and decisively strikes him down in full view of the army. In 185 BCE, the Mauryan dynasty ended as it had begun, with a violent seizure of power. The empire that had unified India crumbled, making way for a new era of regional kingdoms. The grand experiment was over. The crumbling empire dissolves and is replaced by a shot of the lion capital of Ashoka, pristine and powerful, in a modern museum. Its silhouette on modern Indian currency and government documents. The Mauryan political structure may have vanished, but its legacy is immortal. It gave India the very idea of itself, a single, unified entity, Bharat. Ashoka's principles of peace and tolerance, and his wheel of Dhamma, are embedded in the heart of the modern nation. The Ashoka chakra, the wheel, at the center of the modern Indian flag, fluttering in the wind. The wheel spins, connecting the past to the present. The Maurya Empire stands as a testament to the dual nature of power, the power to conquer and the power to transform. Its story forces us to ask a timeless question: what is the true measure of an empire's greatness, the territory it controls, or the ideals it leaves behind?